This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत. बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
This is Bharat FM.
Welcome to Stars Aligned on Bharat FM. I'm, as always, my chai. My guest today is an extraordinary diplomat, politician, and author. He has written 11 books, starting in 1989 with a much celebrated work on Mirza Ghalib, titled Ghalib the Man, and followed it up with Havelis of Old Delhi, Krishna, the Place of Divine, Yudhishthir and Draupadi, The Great Indian Middle Class, Being Indian, Love and Lust, an anthology of erotic literature from ancient to medieval India, Kama Sutra, the art of making love to a woman, Adi Shankaracharya, and now the greatest ode to Lord Ram, Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas. These are apart from 6 works of translation that he has been involved in. As you can tell, there is much to talk to Pavan Kumar Varma about, so let's do it without much ado. Welcome to the show, Mr. Varma.
Pleasure is mine, Mayank. So good to see you again.
Likewise. Let me start with Ghalib's seminal verse, which is one of my favorites that I recite very frequently. And since your writing career began with Ghalib, I think it's only fair that I do that. Hasti ke mat fareeb mein aa jayi wo sab, आलम तमाम हल्का है दामे ख्याल में. आप हस्ती के फरेब में इतने कैसे आ गए?
मुझको इस पर एक दूसरा शेर याद आता है. दुनिया में हूँ, दुनिया का तलबदार नहीं हूँ, बाजार से गुजरा हूँ, खरीदार नहीं. तो मैं हस्ती के फरेब में हूँ भी, और कोशिश मेरी ये है कि उसके जाल में ना फंसूं. But we are all human. Ghalib was a fascinating subject when I first wrote it. And interestingly, I'm not an Urdu da. I went to St. Columbus, St. Xavier, St. Stephen's, then joined the Foreign Service. But from then onwards, and much earlier, there was a desire for me to be more in touch with my cultural roots, be it Sanskrit, be it Urdu, and certainly be it Hindi, which is my mother tongue. And I found that people of my generation who have been predominantly educated in English medium schools, which we all value, sometimes become adrift from our cultural roots. And I also marveled at our own country where, for instance, until recently, if you asked for a book on Ghalib in a big bookshop, they would say they have none. Or if you ask for a book on Adi Shankaracharya, as an example, they may not have one. So I just felt that in the phase of colonization, we were conditioned to, in a sense, move away from our cultural roots, and we have not reappropriated them sufficiently. And so there is a need for us to do so without the xenophobia, without any cultural paranoia, but you have to be Indian in multiple ways in order to actually fully represent this great civilizational legacy. Otherwise, you produce photocopies.
Right.
And nobody respects photocopies.
Right. I have known you in a sense and tracked your career for about a quarter century now, when you were a very active, very prominent diplomat. You've been, although a career diplomat who turned a politician, but your undercurrent has always been that of a scholarly writer. Explain that. Have you always had those predilections?
Yes, I was certainly fond of writing, and as I mentioned earlier, particularly subjects which involved me with the evolution of modern India and with the legacy of our civilizational past, be it more recent, be it in past part of ancient India. And my next book is in fact a book on Hindu civilization, as I see it, which constitutes 4,000 years of our history. So I mean, among the books you mentioned, Mayank, you did not mention, for instance, one of my novels. It's called When Losses Gain. In fact, a Bollywood film is to be made on it if we ever recover from the COVID era. So my point is that I have been involved, in a sense, as a harmonious schizophrenic, one with diplomacy at one level, one with the inner world of trying to understand and pursue some of my deep interests in India, both India of the present and India of the past. And I have been able to manage, it's about time management, doing both. And also writing, and sometimes, as I say, often writing in the crevices of the day, because it's obviously a day has 24 hours, but I've always believed that a day has 28 hours. And you can find the time. If you love something, you'll find the time. Anyone who tells you that they don't have time for something they love is lying to you.
Right. I'm jumping slightly to the immediate theme for a particular reason, because that's the peg of what we are talking about. The greatest ode to Lord Ram, Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, your latest work. We are currently in a phase of what some people describe as, why some people, actually I do, Ram consciousness. What to you are Ram's most compelling attributes within the fact that he is called Maryada Purushottam Ram?
Well, the word Maryada Purushottam says it all. There's a very interesting, nuanced, cerebral, intellectual conceptualization of divinity in Hindu philosophy and religious practice. So if there is Leela Purushottam Krishna, there has to be a Maryada Purushottam Ram. Yeah. If there is a Sita, then somewhere there has to be a Radha. And the Hindu notion of divinity, while seeking plurality to best represent the plenitude of the divine message, chooses different deities to illustrate aspects of that one common ultimate, which has been described as Brahm, that pervasive, pulsating consciousness, which our seers of thousands of years ago in the Upanishads as being the ultimate reality. And it was a remarkably, and I will come back to your question, but a little digression, it was a remarkably revolutionary concept. To think of the ultimate not as deity, Ishwar ki khoj nahi thi. It was, in fact, the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy can almost be called atheist, because they were not looking for God. They were looking for what is the ultimate truth behind the bewildering plurality of this cosmos. And they then said, and in my book on Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism's greatest thinker, I've shown also how the latest discoveries of science in the area of cosmology, quantum physics, and neurology are endorsing that notion of Brahm, that consciousness which is akhand, indivisible, achintya, beyond sight, nirgun, beyond attributes, purna, complete, nirvishesh chinmatram, undifferentiated consciousness, sarva pratyay darshanin, all-knowing. So this pulsating consciousness being the ultimate reality, how does it take divine form? And there is a most remarkable dialectic within Hinduism between nirguna, without attributes, and saguna, with attributes. But it's not done randomly. If Adi Shankaracharya developed Advait thought, which is non-dual, which is Brahm alone is the reality, Ramanuja, Nimbarkar, and others developed the notion of Vishisht Advait, That reality is the ultimate, but that reality has within it the powers to assume a definite form as Ishwar for the benefit of the devotees. So therefore, in our tradition, you have many gods, but all of them reflect that one ultimate. And why do we have many gods? Not because for a moment do Hindus believe that there are indeed many gods. Hindus are remarkable people. They live effortlessly at two planes of consciousness. At one level, we extravagantly humanize our gods. We celebrate their birth, we will celebrate their marriage, we will celebrate it when they go to wars, when they have progeny. We will celebrate, we will uh, imbue with religious fervor a piece of stone, a tree, any form. And at another level, in the same mind, is the realization that all of this is a reflection of that one indivisible, absolute reality, which is Brahm. So you have to understand how Hinduism functions. When a foreign observer often says, oh, such a plurality of gods, especially if you are from, with no disrespect, because I respect all faiths as an article of faith. But when the Abrahamic faiths look at Hinduism, they are mesmerized by the surface diversity. But there is underlying that diversity a remarkable unity of thought embedded in philosophical contemplation. And so you have Maryada Purushottam Ram, and this Ram consciousness that you are talking about. I actually wrote Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, my selection and commentaries on a remarkable piece of work. Because, you know, the Ramcharitmanas is an epic, just like Valmiki's Ramayana was, except that some 2000 years perhaps or more separated them. So Valmiki's Ramayana, as reinterpreted by Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, is an epic, over 12,000 lines. Now, most people may know some parts of it by heart, by rote. Many would be exposed to it. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Harana Bhav Bhaib Darunam. You know, people are exposed to it. In North India in particular, Mayank, it is the eternal companion of a great many Hindus. In fact, it has been called the Bible of North India. And Mahatma Gandhi called the Ramcharitmanas the greatest work of devotional literature. So, my idea is that many people will not read Ramcharitmanas from the beginning till the end. I could give to them selections from it, which are my choice, but which are part of the coherent unfolding of the story, and provide the meanings in both English and Hindi, and also provide a commentary on each of the collection of stanzas so as to give the reader the context, the meaning, the background, the essence of what is being what the poet is trying to say. Then I will perhaps be able to take this remarkable work to a greater audience in a more comprehensible way. That was my effort.
Speaking of your, sorry to interrupt. Speaking of your personal choice, I'm interested to find out how you zeroed in on the specific stanza. Is it thematic or is it random? What was the criteria that you employed?
As like all epics, be it the Iliad, be it the Odyssey, be it Mahabharata, be it Ramcharitmanas, all its parts are important, but there is a lot of obiter dicta, extra things added on as part of the narrative. My criteria was to take, first of all, those stanzas which constitute, in a way, the principal segments of the unfolding of a story. But as importantly, take those stanzas which, in terms of their poetic skill, impressed me the most. So I took those stanzas. The selection may not be one that somebody else may make.
Right.
But I'm happy to note that most people who have seen this book have said that they like my selection of the stanzas. So there was these two criteria before me, because I want you to remember or keep in your mind that Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas is important for three things. One, it tells the story of Maryada Purushottam Ram. Two, it is a remarkable philosophical work as well. The whole dialectic of Hinduism, which I touched upon earlier, between Nirgun, attributeless, and Sagun, with form, that is carried forward by Tulsidas, who then bridges this gap between Nirgun and Sagun in his own remarkable way by saying, Aguna Saguna Doi Brahma Swarupa, Akath Agath Anadi Anupa. In other words, Aguna and Sagun, they are part of the same Brahma. He says, Phule Kamal so hasar kaise, Phule Kamal so hasar kaise, Nirgun Brahma Sagun bane jaise.
Wow.
Just like Nirgun Brahma becomes Sagun. So he said that differentiation between the two, while absolute at the philosophical level in one sense, is unimportant in what context? In the context of bhakti.
Right.
And Tulsidas's main focus is bhakti.
Right. Right.
Surrender to me, prapatti to me, bhakti to me, and you will bridge that difference between Nirgun and Sagun. Leave it to the philosophers.
Right.
So, according to him, Janani Janak, Bandhu Sutadara, Janani Janak, parents, Bandhu, friend, Sut, son, Dara, spouse. Janani Janak, Bandhu Sutadara, Tana Dhana Bhavana Suhadra Parivara. Tana Dhana Suhadra relatives, Bhavan Parivar. I mean, everyone, family. Sabki Mamata Taga Batori. Tie all of these into, weave them into a cord. Mama Pad Manahi Bandh Baridori. And tie the cord around my feet. Surrender. When you surrender, because remember, Tulsidas was also part of the great Bhakti movement in India.
Right.
And that Bhakti movement was the ultimate fruition, first of philosophical debate, and then of the realization that merely the philosophical quibble is not sufficient. You must be able to negate your ego. Surrender. What happens when you surrender? This, as Adi Shankaracharya says, your mind consists of buddhi, intellect, ahankar, ego, and behind it all, the ever silent, still, observing chitta. Now, if you silence the mind, which is permanently active, even if you wake up at night, it's like a monkey jumping from one branch to another tree. And the ego never leaves us. We give so much importance to ourselves. If you silence the mind and if you negate the ego, the chitta within you comes alive, and that chitta is defined only by two things: Chid, Anand, complete alertness, total joy, complete bliss, unalloyed bliss. Satchidanand.
Right.
As Shankaracharya says in Nirvana Shatakam, Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham, Shivoham. Only this matters. Na punyam, na papam, na sokhyam, na dukkham, na mantro, na tirtham, na vedo, na yagna. Aham bhojyanam neva bhojyam na bhokta. What matters? Chidananda Rupa.
Right.
Shivoham, Shivoham. And look at Hinduism. He says, I am Shiva, I am Shiva.
Absolutely.
You know, Socrates had to drink hemlock
Right.
in the claim that he is the divine.
True.
In Al-Hallaj had to be killed because he said, Anul Haq, I am God. But in Hinduism, there is no blasphemy.
That's right.
There is no heresy. There is tolerance and acceptance of the divergence of viewpoint and the acceptance that you are actually the same as that ultimate. You know, the Mahavakyas of the Upanishad. Aham Brahmasmi.
Right.
I am Brahm.
Yeah.
I am Atma Brahm. The Atma within me and Brahm are the same.
Right.
So therefore, to come back to your question, whichever it was, I've forgotten. I went off here.
कोई बात नहीं, निकल पड़े जर्नी में, ठीक है. Yeah, no, I was in fact, several things jumped out at me. One is at the rather somewhat trigger level, the fact that Tulsidas, who was, as much as these things mean anything, they don't mean anything to me. He was a Brahmin who chose not to write in Sanskrit, but Awadhi, with a specific intent of reaching out or broadening the Bhakti movement. Something that in Gujarat 100 years prior, Narsi Mehta did, but he was an unlettered man. He was not a scholar in the sense of Tulsidas. Although he came from the same social cultural milieu of Nagar community, he gave it all up and wrote the way he wrote exactly the things that we are talking about. Why do you think Tulsidas was driven by the need to write in Awadhi? I mean, you already explained, but tell us a bit more about that.
You see, because you have to see what has transpired. In the 8th century, there was the Bhagavad Puran. It's written in Sanskrit. In the 12th century, you have Jayadev's Geet Govind. Now, it's a work of total Radha Krishna lore and bhakti. Through the love affair of Radha and Krishna. Incidentally, Mayank, Radha doesn't exist before the 12th century.
I see.
Neither in the Vishnu Puran nor in the Harivamsh is there any mention of Radha. Usually what happens is Krishna does a ras and there are 16 gopis. Each of them, because of his divine powers, believes that she is alone with him. But none of them is designated as the one which is Radha. Jayadev invents Radha. Because if Krishna is Shringar Murtimam, the very epitome of the Shringar mood, the sensual mood, then he needed to create a counterfoil, a feminine counterfoil, and he creates Radha as Raseshwari, the very essence of Rasa. And Radha comes, and that opens the floodgates of bhakti. It takes over the imagination of all of Hindu India. And then you have works written not in Sanskrit. Chandidas writes lyrical poetry of Radha and Krishna in Bengali. Vidyapati writes in Mithila, in Maithili. You have Bihari writing in Brij. You have Surdas writing in Brij. And Tulsidas as part of that tradition, they were all contemporaneous or leading up to Tulsidas, also chose consciously to move away from Sanskrit and write in Awadhi, the language of the masses. In fact, there was controversy over it because Tulsidas anticipated the disapproval of his own peer group to his conscious choice of Awadhi over Sanskrit. And he refers to it. But he took that decision, began to write in Ayodhya, and completed it after he moved to Kashi. And there were stories that legitimized this. There is this apocryphal story that his enemies or his adversaries, Sanskrit scholars, put a bunch of books on the Ramayana in Vishwanath Mandir in Kashi and placed Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas at the bottom of the heap. And in the morning, when they opened the doorway of the temple, Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas was right at the top with a message from Shiva himself, Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So there was a legitimacy in writing in the language of the common man, which is why today Ramcharitmanas is the Bible of so many Hindus.
Yeah. I wanted to jump a little back to your earlier reference to Krishna as Leela Purushottam. This has been my old sort of, as we call it, kite flying theory, that you could never build an aggressive political movement around Krishna the way it has been done around Ram, for the simple reason that Krishna is often too flighty, too elusive, too profound, too flamboyant to focus people's mind on one particular aspect of life. Compare that to Ram, who is very restrained, very correct, full of rectitude, and hence lends himself to the kind of transformation that we have seen in India since the late 1980s. Would you agree with that characterization at all?
No, if people with a certain political motivation want to appropriate a Hindu divinity, Krishna would also do. Krishna is also a remarkable example of the sheer suppleness of the Hindu imagination. Again, a foreign observer cannot understand it. Here is a god stealing butter. Here is a god as an adolescent flirting with the gopis. Here is a god then when he grows up frolicking with the gopis on the Yamuna. Here is a god who is a king. Here is a god involved in the battle in Mahabharata, occasionally cheating as well. Here is a god who gives the sermon of the Bhagavad Gita, Nishkam Karma. But here is a god also with the Sudarshan Chakra to mete out justice to those who are his or Dharma's opponents. So Krishna could have been appropriated, but Krishna is Leela Purushottam. It becomes that much more difficult to appropriate him because, as someone lightly said, Krishna represents. What is Leela? My granddaughter is called Leela. What is Leela? Leela is God enjoying himself playing the fool.
Right.
It's for the sheer joy of it. That is Leela. And in a sense, even Ram reflects that. I mean, Ram is, according to our tradition, the ultimate God for those who are his believers. Maryada Purushottam. Here is the ultimate God. After Sita is abducted, grieving like an ordinary mortal. Ganagamanda Navagarjata Gora, Priyaheen Darapat Manamora. When it rains and the clouds are there is thunder, and he's alone with Lakshman without Sita, he says, without her I feel afraid. This is Leela, because he is the ultimate God. So you can appropriate any divinity. I don't think that the appropriation of Ram, the weaponization of Ram, is entirely in keeping with the character of Maryada Purushottam Ram. Maryada Purushottam Ram can be used to obtain justice for a noble cause.
Right.
But Maryada Purushottam cannot be used for irrational anger,
Right.
unwarranted vengeance, or condemnable violence. Because what does Ram say in Ramcharitmanas at least? Ram himself says to Bharat, Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai, par peeda sam nahi athmai. Par hit, the welfare of others. There is no greater virtue than that. And par peeda, giving injury to others, there is no greater sin than that. When he's born, and people sing this every time in Ram Navami, even I sing it, my family sings it at home for generations. Bhai pragat kripala, deen dayala. Kripala, the merciful, deen dayala, the protector of the weak. Karuna sukh sagar, the very ocean of compassion. This is Ram. So Ram will, being Maryada Purushottam, will never take the law into his own hands.
Right.
So to weaponize Ram, in my view, is a misinterpretation of Ram. You can fight for what you think is right, but within the realm of Maryada, as resolutely, but the abuse, the violence, the anger, the vengeance, the affliction of the innocent, that is not part of Maryada Purushottam Ram. In fact, it's not a part of Hinduism at all. Hinduism conquers by assimilation. Hinduism conquers by resilience. Hinduism conquers because it is Sanatana.
Right. Since I triggered a slightly political theme in my last question, I might as well segue into another one, which I would have asked you anyway, which is more current, more newsworthy for me. With the groundbreaking in Ayodhya and the commencement of a possible Ram temple, which is in the next maybe 2-3 years, how do you think the Bharatiya Janata Party will reconcile with the denouement of an issue which actually built it as a party, and it's suddenly now no longer the angst that people had? Do you think they will feel lost without something to rally people around, or you think they'll find something else?
I don't think they should feel lost, and I do hope that they won't. This is the fulfillment of an agenda which the BJP, the RSS, the VHP considered to be of importance. But leave alone the political parties. A great many, if not crores of Hindus, not only in India but abroad, believed that to have a temple in Sri Ram's city, Ayodhya, at a place where people believe he is born.
Right.
Now, this is a matter of faith. Don't ask for incontrovertible proof. You cannot provide it for any faith, not only Hinduism, a matter of faith. To have a temple there is something that would be a fitting tribute to one of the most popular gods of our pantheon. Therefore, I'm glad that this has been achieved in a remarkably Indian way. The best struggle continued for 136 years. A temple was many years ago, a masjid was, the gates were opened, idols were placed, puja began, an andolan, an agitation began, a masjid was brought back, the dispute remained unresolved. Now finally, how is it done? It is done by an order from the Supreme Court of India, which says that the demolition of the Babri Masjid was wrong, that those responsible for it should be prosecuted. Then it decides on the merits of the evidence presented that the title, it's a title suit, remember, amazingly in India, people are fighting on the basis of faith for a temple for their most beloved God at the spot where he is born through a title suit. A title suit gives the nyas, the Hindu nyas for the temple, the claim to that area. But at the same time, the Supreme Court says that 5 acres of land elsewhere will also be given to build a mosque.
Right.
Now, few countries can resolve such an intractable dispute between two religious communities in a manner like this. So the Supreme Court has decided. Actually, I believe it should mark a closure. If the construction of a temple for Sri Ram leads to triumphalism, or in any way, in my view, gives a sanction to forces which seek to further divide society by sowing religious hatred or through violence of any kind, or taking the law into their own hands, I believe it will be a betrayal of what Maryada Purushottam Ram stood for, what the priorities of the Republic of India are as a multi-faith country which respects all faiths. And it would be a betrayal of some of the basic principles of Hinduism. Please understand, Hinduism, just to quickly finish my answer to you. I mean, thousands, literally 5,000 years ago, sitting in the forests, our sages said, Ekam Satya Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. At a time when in most parts of the world, people were saying it is only what we believe is right. Here the sages are saying there is one truth, but wise people call it by different names.
Right.
It was these sages who says, Ano Bhadraha Kritavo Yantu Vishwatah. At a time when people were building walls to protect only what they thought was right, here we said, let noble thoughts come from all directions. It is the same sages who said, Udar Charitanam Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. At a time when people said outsiders should be kept away, here they were saying the entire world is our family. This is the tradition of Hinduism.
Right.
And in accordance with that, I believe it would be a great misfortune if the building of the Ram temple, which I wholeheartedly welcome, should become a reason for further communal acrimony, discord, or violence.
Okay, the second and the last question, political, sir. It's a little more specific. In 2019, the eligible voters, the number was about 911 million people, of which about 67% voted, which would be about 610 million people, of which 38%, which is BJP's highest tally till date, voted for the party, which makes it about 15 million people. In a country of 1.3, 1.4 billion people, to claim even a socio-cultural mandate of 210 million people as representing the entire country, how do you think that should be seen as?
Well, in a democracy, the party which wins the largest number of seats in a parliamentary election forms the government. The BJP actually won an absolute majority. But the percentage of votes, while the BJP got the largest chunk of it, a very sizable amount also went to non-BJP parties. The issue here is that the opposition is divided.
Right.
I say this it's unfortunate in a way because a democracy needs a credible opposition. But for whatever reasons, I will not go into them now. The Congress party has failed to reinvent itself. Other parties are in their regional silos or unable to form a pan-Indian unity on a common platform. That gives the advantage to the BJP, but it does not raise its percentage of votes that it gets. It's just that the votes it does not get gets divided among many parties.
Right.
And so the BJP benefits.
Right. Okay, now to shift gears and the last few questions. One is, do you think as a rule, Indian politicians of your generation and younger have almost completely given up on intellectual pursuits the way it used to be in pre-independence India or even 20, 30 years after 1947, I find that a lot of young politicians, apart from being almost semi-literate, even those who are literate are not able to construct, forget an erudite thought, even a proper cohesive sentence when you hear them. Why do you think India is suffering from such a desperate lack of intellectual pursuit?
Two or three reasons come to my mind. Firstly, there is a phase which is not yet over of the further democratization of Indian politics. There was earlier a relative elite, which was also part of politics, well educated. If you hear the Constituent Assembly debates or the early years of Parliament, people came from relatively better backgrounds in terms of their financial status. There was an element of inheritance of, in a sense, political power. And but over time in Indian democracy, you have a lot of first generation bureaucrats who have not gone to English speaking schools, who may not sound that erudite or eloquent to you and me, but who are perhaps even more grounded in their own cultural roots.
No, true, sorry to interrupt, but I wasn't being specific in terms of the language. You could be erudite in any of the Indian languages. I find that even the languages that India has, such hugely rich variety, even in those you don't come across people who are erudite, as it were. You find them fractured, you find them hobbling along, their expressions and mixed up with several other ideas. I'm just, it's a broad observation that has troubled me for quite some time.
I will not disagree with you, but there is also, Mayank, a dumbing down of the great intellectual legacy of our civilizational heritage. Dumbing down, I mean that in any sector of creative or intellectual expression, you will find that it's only the very few who excel on a global standard. And our educational system is such that we produced far too many cogs of somebody else's wheel. They don't become the wheel themselves.
Right.
So, I mean, politics cannot become an island unto itself. It reflects that dumbing down. And it's unfortunate. And the third aspect is the tolerance level of the people at large. Why do they accept politicians whose language is coarse, whose knowledge is shallow?
True.
Who can only manipulate politics and use money power or muscle power?
Right.
Ultimately, the voter has to become more discriminating. And I'm confident that will happen.
Four last broad questions about your other books. One is, of course, my all-time fascination about Mirza Ghalib. I think you don't find such profundity in poetry, to my limited knowledge, perhaps anywhere in the world, in one person producing something so astonishing. You have paid so much attention to Ghalib's work. Why do you think he became what he did? Was it some preternatural gift, or he was a product of his time? Why do you think Ghalib became as great as he did?
Ghalib was in no doubt about his genius. है और भी दुनिया में सुखनवर बहुत अच्छे, कहते हैं कि गालिब का है अंदाजे बयां और.
Right.
So he was in no doubt of his genius, and he was remarkably intelligent. And above all, what was fascinating was the times in which he lived. You know, they may help to mold a person's sensibility, the sharpness of their artistic sensibility. He lived at a time when the Mughal Empire was dying but was not dead. And the British were coming but had not formally come.
Right.
At his time, Bahadur Shah Zafar in the Lal Killa in New Delhi was still the Jahanpana, the British resident in Delhi, when he had an audience with His Majesty the Emperor still bowed 7 times in salam and made a peshkash of a nazrana in accordance with old court etiquette. But behind this facade, the Mughal emperor was a pensioner of the British confined to the Red Fort. The people of Delhi had a doggerel, a little poem which they used to say, Az Dilli ta palam, Badshahate Shah Alam. Shah Alam was Bahadur Shah's father. His kingdom extends from Delhi to Palam. Then they what is. So people knew, but the pageantry went on. And until 1857, when the Great Revolt happened, Delhi was destroyed. The Delhi as Ghalib knew it. And the two contemporaries, great poets, contemporaries of Ghalib, Momin and Zauq,
Right.
great poets, they died before 1857. Ghalib lived on till 1869, the year in which Mahatma Gandhi was born. For 12 years or, whatever, he lived on beyond and saw the city that he loved being destroyed and being rebuilt. Now, all this plays on a naturally inborn literary genius. And Ghalib mirrored one very important aspect of his time. He was Sufi by temperament. You see, hum mubahid hai. This is what he used to say. He believed in that one ultimate, but was very impatient with religious ritual, religious orthodoxy, and the mullahs. In fact, when he died, his friends and relatives could not decide whether he should be buried by Shia rites or Sunni rites. He was a Sufi and symbolized the era of his time, one of the best Sufi poets we have known.
Right. Tell me, as an author of such diversity, you have Kama Sutra, the art of making love to a woman on one hand, and Adi Shankaracharya, the greatest Hindu thinker, on the other. How do you reconcile your mind when you look at these themes of such vast variety? Do you see an underlying current to these two particular themes when you look at them as a writer?
Certainly, Mayank, because Hinduism unites them. Please look at the worldview of Hinduism. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha.
Right.
Vatsyayan, who wrote the Kama Sutra. You have to understand the Kama Sutra in the larger worldview. If there is the Kama Sutra and there is Kautilya's Arthashastra, and there are the Upanishads. Now see it in the Hindu worldview. What are the 4 Purusharths, the goals? Dharma, Artha, the pursuit of material well-being at a certain phase of your life as a householder. Kama, the pursuit of the sensual. And Moksha, which is salvation. Now, Vatsyayan, in writing the Kama Sutra in the first chapter, people think the Kama Sutra is only about impossible postures. It is not. In the first chapter, Vatsyayan allows an imaginary interlocutor to ask him, why do we need this book? And Vatsyayan answers that the 4 Purusharths of life are Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Each of the first 3, Dharma, Artha, and Kama, pursued in proportion and not in exclusion, part of the balanced life, pursued in proportion and none pursued in exclusion, leads automatically to the 4th, which is Moksha. So whether it is Kama or whether it is Brahma, both can at different levels be a window to the divine. That is why also in Hinduism you have many paths to the ultimate. The Bhakti Marg, the Karam Marg, and as Adi Shankaracharya espoused, the Gyan Marg. Right. Choose your path. It's not a prescriptive religion, but the goal remains one, right, of enlightenment.
why have you called Adi Shankaracharya the greatest Hindu thinker? Tell our listeners and viewers. They know the name Adi Shankaracharya, but I think pretty much that's where it stops for most of them. And if you can, without making it too profound for some of the listeners, if you can tell us why you think what you think about him.
You see, Adi Shankaracharya is a truly Renaissance figure, to use your word. You see, he's born in the 8th century. He's born in Kerala, Kaladi. He takes Samadhi in Kedarnath, right in the north. He lives for only 32 years. In this period, he writes the most scintillating, in-depth commentaries on the foundational texts of Hinduism. Most of the main Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita, apart from a lot more. Analyzing and taking Hinduism's evolution at the philosophical level to another plane in elaborating its key concepts. He also unites many aspects of Hinduism. And he at the same time sets up 4 mathas, monasteries if you like,
Right.
which are the civilizational map of India. One in the south at Sringeri, deep south. One in the west at Dwarka. One in the east at Puri. And one right in the north, just below Badrinath at Joshimath. So he sets up this civilizational map of India, which has existed for millennia. All of this he does in 32 years of life. He only lives 32 years. But both as a thinker and the remarkable life he led, he walked on foot,
Right.
starting from Kerala. He went to the Narmada Omkareshwar, where his guru, Govindapad and Gaudapad were, to learn the Advait philosophy. From there, he went to Kashi. Then he established one thing very important, which is the essence of Hinduism. Sabhya Samvad, civilized discourse. He did that in an institutional way through a practice called Shastrarth. I listen to you and you listen to me. Let's have a discussion and debate. It's a dying art in India today.
It's already there.
Out of town. You just have to look at the television channels. But against his greatest ideological opponent, also a great mind called Mandan Mishra, who believed in the Karam Kand philosophy, that you can reach moksha by following prescribed karma in the way of puja, the right karma kand, the ritual. And Shankaracharya believed in the Gyan Marg, knowledge. So he goes to Mandan Mishra and says, okay, let's have a debate. And Mandan Mishra agrees. And these two giants sit down. And the debate continues for days. And all of Hindu India in a day and time when there was neither internet nor social media, through word of mouth, follow this debate. Seminal in the evolution of Hinduism. And imagine the civility of the debate that Shankaracharya agrees that Mandan Mishra's wife, Ubhay Bharti, will be the umpire. And whoever will lose the debate as decided by the umpire, who is the wife of one of the protagonists,
Right.
will become the follower of the other, and she decides that Adi Shankaracharya won that, not fight, that debate. That is the essence of Hinduism. So for a variety of reasons, Shankaracharya remains one of the great figures in the evolution of Hinduism.
The last question relates to your book about the middle class in 1998. That's when it came out first. I think since then you have updated it. Tell me the middle class in those days, your critique was that economic liberalization has created a situation where the middle class is so focused on itself to the detriment and exclusion of the underprivileged. It's been almost 30 years now, at least 25. Do you think there has been any shift since then, or you think it's become better or it's become worse, especially given the kind of political climate or cultural climate that we have seen emerge again in the last 15, 20 years?
Let me preface my answer quickly by saying that I have great respect for the middle class. It's an extremely resourceful, intelligent, entrepreneurial, dynamic class, which has mastered the art of survival in difficult situations, where not one coordinate is predictable. The middle class in America knows there'll be electricity, there'll be water, the internet will work, there'll be transport, there'll be health facility, an ambulance will arrive. For the vast Indian middle class and for large sections of it, none of these are guaranteed.
Right.
And there are more aspirants than there are vacancies. So it's a competitive middle class. They used to say, yak anar sad bimar. One pomegranate, 100 ill men. So that is the middle class. So I admire it and I analyze it in that way. It's evolution from 1947 and before onwards to what it has become. But that basic critique of mine, Mayank, remains valid. The middle class, although it has grown exponentially in size, and to my mind, it would be anywhere between 500 and 700 million people in our country today. Because how do you define the middle class? Not by Western standards. Anyone above the poor, the very poor, and anyone below the very rich, they are all already mentally by attitude middle class. They can be lower, middle, or upper middle class.
Right.
But for middle class. But it remains a class which is insular, which is more concerned about its own upward mobility than about though millions and millions below it.
Right.
In our country, therefore, I believe we need to have a greater sense of civic responsibility, of paropkar, of doing more for people collectively or otherwise, greater social sensitivity to deprivation. The middle class wants to remove from its vision any obstacle to the fulfillment of its own priorities. And if they are the poor, let them hide themselves somewhere rather than stand in the way.
Right. And absolutely finally, I cannot let you go without two specific requests. One is, आपकी फेवरेट मुझे एक तो मिर्जा गालिब की कोई भी दो तीन अगर मिसरे सुना दे या एक भी सुना दे तो भी ठीक है, और दूसरा तुलसीदास की कोई भी, जो दो तो सुनाई आपने वैसे, लेकिन उनको छोड़ के कुछ अगर आपके दिमाग में आती है दो बातें, उस नोट पे हम एंड करेंगे.
देखिए, आपने इतने सवाल पूछे मुझसे.
जी.
गालिब की एक नज्म मुझे आपके सवालों से ही याद आ रही है. हर एक बात पे कहते हो तुम कि तू क्या है, तुम ही कहो कि ये अंदाज़े गुफ्तगू क्या है. जला है जिस्म जहां दिल भी जल गया होगा, कुरेद दे हो जो ये राख जुस्तजू क्या है. रगों में दौड़ते फिरने के हम नहीं खायल, जब आंख ही से न टपका तो फिर लहू क्या है. हर एक बात पे कहते हो तुम कि तू क्या है. Now about Shri Ram, of course, so much can be recited, but quickly I want to mention the brilliance of Ram, of Tulsidas. How does he answer what is Maya? Lakshman asks him, please explain to me what is Maya, this whole Maya, this world. And he uses one line. मैं arumor tor te maya. The notion of मैं or mera, मैं arumor, and this is tera. This is yours, this is mine, and मैं. That one line he says, that is Maya.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Mr. Verma, I'm going to practice a very mild form of nepotism before I let you go, and my brother would kill me if I didn't do it. My brother Manoj Chai, who lives in Rajasthan, Jodhpur area, he wanted me to convey with all his force that he is perhaps your greatest admirer. Although politically he may not be on your side, but in terms of the way you are, he says, please just tell him whatever you feel like, it will still be inadequate. So here is to you from Manoj.
Please thank him. And I want to thank you and Madanji and Bharat FM for this great opportunity to meet a new audience with whom I hope I will have occasions to interact in the future.
Absolutely. We look forward to it, and thank you very much for your time, and my absolute best to you for your next book.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is
Bye-bye.
Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत
This is Bharat FM.